My daughter said, "You're moving to a nursing home." Then she hung up. Those words landed in my kitchen like a plate thrown against the tile. For a breath, I stood with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the small domestic sounds that had always made a house into home. Coffee percolating, the slow creak of the screen door, while a voice that should have been familiar felt foreign and sharp. Angela's voice, my only child, the woman whose first cry I had answered and whose first steps I had steadied. I remember thinking, absurdly, that the phone felt heavier than it had 10 seconds before. It was the same handset Robert and I had used for 45 years, the same one that had been on the table the day we said goodbye to him. He had been gone 3 months. There were still fresh flowers on the mantel because I didn't trust myself to throw them away. Grief makes you hold on to small things like they are anchors. I put the phone down without making another sound and walked to the window. The truck was where Robert had parked it that morning. Dented bumper, faded red paint, a blanket thrown over the passenger seat where Robert liked to nap on long drives. Our beach house, with its salt-worn steps and the handrail he refused to replace, stood quiet on the horizon. The house hummed with memory. 30 years of summers lived there, of birthdays and breakups held, of arguments and laughter. None of it belonged to Angela, because she had always felt, it seemed, that she could take whatever she wanted when she needed it. She had spoken with a flatness that didn't even give me the courtesy of anger. "We sold the house, Ma. Sold the truck. You'll need to move to a home. It's for the best." Then she said she and Edward, her husband, had already arranged for a place in Europe, and that they would send someone to help me pack. Edward. The name tasted wrong in my mouth the way sour milk does when you least expect it. When they married 3 years ago, I tried to like him. I really did. He had a smile that could charm the clerk at the DMV, and a way of laughing at jokes that weren't funny. At the time, I told myself Angela was young and in love and that I should trust her judgment. Robert used to laugh and say I worried like a woman who had sewn her life with safety pins, mending, tucking, smoothing seams so nothing frayed. He was right. That's how I had kept the family together. The first 2 weeks after Robert died were a blur of casseroles left by neighbors, the priest's visits, and the kind of stoic sleep that comes when you finally stop pretending. Angela stayed for the funeral, black dress clinging to tired bones. She said the right things, hugged the right people, but there was something in her eyes. Distance, impatience I couldn't put my finger on. She had taken Robert's watch as if it were a trophy, and laughed when I told her to leave his fishing gear alone. And then the day she called to tell me she'd sold the house and the truck. The room where I stood, smelling the faint coffee that had gone cold, suddenly felt too small to contain the outrage and the sorrow. I wanted to call her back and say the things that had been in my throat for weeks. I wanted to tell her how I had rearranged our lives to make room for her, how Robert and I had worked nights and weekends so she could go to college, how I had gone without vacations so she could have braces and new shoes. But my words would have landed like rocks. She didn't need them. She wanted the job done, and she wanted me out of the way. Instead, I made coffee. I doctored it the way Robert used to. Heavy cream, no sugar, just to keep a ritual. Rituals are small defiances against the world when it feels as if the ground has shifted under you. I sat at the kitchen table with my mug warming my hands and let the silence speak. That afternoon, dusting the bookshelf, the kind of domestic chore grief makes necessary for the illusion of control, I found the envelope. It was tucked behind a row of old cookbooks, the kind that had come with splattered sauces and penciled notes. It was the same manila envelope Robert had always used for important things, receipts, an old map, sometimes a love note folded into quarters. His handwriting was on it, slanted and familiar. He had written my name in ink he favored, the blue one he kept in the back pocket of his work shirt. For a long time, I just held it. It felt heavier than paper should. When I slit it open with a butter knife, because my hand still wanted the ordinary tools, I found the truth bundled inside like a small treasure. Deeds, account statements, a key to a safety deposit box, and a letter in Robert's neat hand. "You are rich, my love," he had written. And then in the next line, "Not rich in the loud way the world keeps score, but rich in a way it will matter when the noise of life quiets down, and the measure of what we leave is clear." Reading that first sentence made something in me uncoil. Robert had been a careful man with money in the way some people are careful with prayers, reverent, private, steady. He had placed 1,000 small stones in a jar over the years, extra shifts, conservative investments, a habit of tucking away instead of spending. I had known some of it, of course. He had told me about a modest retirement plan and a little savings for the beach house maintenance. But this envelope told me he had built more than I had been told. He had wanted to shield me from the worry of managing more than we needed. His last note read like a request and a test. Use it well, he had written. Use it kind. If I have done this right, no one will see the seams until it is time. The room blurred for a moment. For 3 months, I had been living in the whole of our marriage, a house filled with small echoes. Now I held proof that the vessel had a hidden hold. I sat back and ran my fingers over the edges of the papers, feeling both treacherous and very much like a thief.
But Robert had not stolen anything from me. He had given it purpose. There are decisions that we make when grief keeps our hands soft. I could have called Angela then and told her everything. I could have demanded the truck be brought back and refused to move an inch. I could have screamed and made her hear the hurt in my bones. I could have done that and be the kind of woman who makes every slight into public proof of failure. Instead, I folded the documents back into the envelope and put them in the pocket of my cardigan. It felt like putting away a dangerous secret. I would need counsel, legal counsel, because people like to make things disappear when they think they can get ahead. Angela had already arranged the sale. There would be paperwork, and there would be signatures. I needed someone who understood how to read what the world calls ordinary and find the truth beneath. Mr. Peterson had been our family lawyer for as long as Robert had been stubborn about fixing the fence himself. He was a man with soft eyes and an absolute belief in process. When I called, his assistant asked whether everything was all right. I told the truth in the bluntest way I could muster. My husband had left me papers, and I thought someone had done things behind my back. "Come by tomorrow," he said, without flourish, which was exactly the kind of study that feels like armor. He greeted me in the small office with a bag of sympathy I didn't need and a cup of black coffee that tasted like stationery. We sat at his desk, and he slid the documents into careful hands. He didn't look surprised, just measured. "Mr. Brooks had a mind for details," he said. "He rarely took risks, Mrs. Brooks. If he left you this, there will be a way to make it legally yours. But first we have to look at what was signed, and when." He walked me through, in plain language, things I already understood and things I needed explained. The deeds were clean. Titles to the beach house, the little apartment building on Maple Street, the old truck, except for one entry that made him frown. Someone had filed a transfer of ownership for the beach house that bore Angela's name as the purchaser. The signature was not the same as the one on the title we had. It was shaky, hurried. The dates were odd. "It looks like a quick sale," Mr. Peterson said. "Sometimes people make mistakes when they move fast. We can object. We can produce the documents Mr. Brooks left. We can take this to court if we need to. There is a process for reversing sales done under questionable circumstances, but it will take time. Time. The thing that feels both friend and enemy when you are wrestling with other people's choices." I told him about the phone call. I told him Angela said I was going to a nursing home. He listened and then asked a question I had been trying not to answer aloud. "Do you want me to tell her everything?" I felt my throat tighten. Tell her everything, and perhaps her eyes would flicker with guilt, and then she might find a way to file counterclaims, to create messes that could take years to undo. Or tell her, and she might behave as if nothing had happened, secure in the knowledge that the mother she thought she'd pushed aside would still be there. There was a strange calculation to be made when the person you love has hurt you. Not how to punish, but how to change a pattern. "I don't want a spectacle," I told him. "I don't want to make her feel small in front of other people. I want to make her understand, without destroying her. If I had to put a single word on it, it would be teaching. I want her to learn that you can't tear down the people who raise you and expect there to be no consequence." Mr. Peterson steepled his fingers and looked at me as if he were weighing the worth of a delicate piece of china. "We can proceed quietly," he said. "We can file the appropriate titles, challenge the sale, and I'll place a hold on distribution of any assets that were transferred improperly. We can work within the system. You won't have to show your hand. I'll handle the court filings, the negotiation with the buyers. But legally, Mrs. Brooks, you have to be prepared. There are costs, and there will be time. And it may hurt your daughter if she finds out later that you didn't move as she directed. It may hurt her now if I do what she wants," I said. That night, I slept on the couch. The letter from Robert was heavy in my cardigan and heavier in my heart. He had always been the quiet architect of our security. He had also been a curious man about the future. He had once said, half in jest, half serious, that he wanted me to have the option of scandal-free independence. He had hated the idea of me relying on someone else's pity. That detail made me smile and broke me all at once. For the next 3 weeks, I lived 2 lives. By day, I performed the widow. I accepted casseroles and said thank yous that sounded scripted because grief had taught me that politeness is a kind of armor. I sat on the porch and swept the path until my hands ached. I went to the grocery and counted coupons. I let neighbors see me in worn skirts and the same cardigan, as if the ease of my outward appearances could convince the world that I had nowhere else to go. No one in my block suspected the keystrokes that happened after midnight. By night, I met with Mr. Peterson in his office, signed papers, and watched him send certified letters. We challenged the sale of the beach house. We placed a lien on the truck's transfer. We quietly purchased back a unit in the Maple Street building that had been sold out from under us, using funds Mr. Peterson advised were legally Robert's and now mine. It was meticulous work, the kind of slow, satisfying labor that suits people who are used to sewing hems tight. I didn't tell Angela. I could have.
A person in my position might have announced a dramatic reveal. You thought you could take my life. Look at me now. But Robert had never liked spectacle. His gifts were always private, meant to be used, not waved around. Besides, Angela needed something that no document could give her, the experience of owning up to the choices she'd made. I watched Angela from a distance. She wore her impatience like a jacket, and it fit. She sent me pictures from Europe, a cafe in Paris, a cobbled street in Lisbon, a sunset over an unfamiliar sea. Edward's arm was around her in most of them. He looked handsome in all of them, a magazine's idea of success. He posted pictures of investment meetings and an office I knew in my bones was rented for appearances. In the private messages she sent to me, short, clipped, she would mention arrangements, plans to renovate the house we once loved into something more modern, and the promise that she had made sure I wouldn't be alone. The promises were neat and careless. There was a moment, about a week into our quiet legal campaign, when I almost relented. I nearly called Angela and told her what I had done. I imagined how her face would fall when she realized that what she had thought she could sweep away with the stroke of a pen had roots deeper than she'd imagined. But then I remembered the way she had said nursing home, as if it were a sentence of convenience. I remembered the look she had given Robert's watch, as if it were an adornment, not a memory. I held the envelope to my chest and let the quiet resolve itself into something firm. People ask me, sometimes later when they hear the story, if I felt cruel. It is a hard thing to answer. There are nights when I thought about how my choices might be misread, when the cost of my silence seemed like a wound that would never heal. But the truth is this: I missed Robert the way the sea misses the sun in the off-season, loud, endless, painfully present. I carried grief like a second skin. In that rawness, decisions had to be made with care. I wanted Angela to become the woman she could be, not the woman she assumed she could be by taking what she wanted. About 6 weeks after that phone call, trouble found its way across the ocean in the form of a brief, frantic email. The lines came like staccato heartbeats. Edward had, according to Angela, been in over his head. Something about a company he had vouched for folding overnight. There were creditors calling, and the apartment in Lisbon that had been under his name was suddenly tied up in disputes. The tone of her messages changed from self-assured postcards to quick, pleading notes. I could have flown across the world. I had the means, thanks to the accounts Mr. Peterson had confirmed, to buy a business-class ticket and land on a foreign tarmac with a purse full of checks and a determination to fix things.
I could have arrived like a deus ex machina, waving papers and bank statements, showing the world that the woman they thought fragile had the wallet of a matriarch. But this was not a rescue that would redeem her. A habit of entitlement is not cured by replacing one advantage with another. I thought of Robert's words, "Use it kind," and of all the evenings when Angela had come home and I had found jewelry missing from bowls on the dresser and receipts for things we didn't need. Teaching is a clumsy thing. It can bruise. It can leave both lessons and scars. Yet the alternative, perpetuating a pattern that would allow her to believe taking was without consequence, felt like a worse cruelty. When Angela called to say she was coming home, I felt a crack in my sternness. Her voice over the phone the night she arrived at the airport was small and tired. She apologized in a way that was half plea and half exhaustion. Edward had left, she said. The accounts had frozen. She had sold what she could and was tired of pretending everything was fine. I told her to come. There was a guest room in the house, a spare mattress that had been used more for storage than sleep. I told her I would open the door. I did not tell her about the documents, about the way the world had shifted under her feet without her noticing. I did not tell her that I had already begun undoing what had been done to our home. Instead, I bought a pot roast and let the oven do the work while Angela slept on the couch with a shawl draped over her knees, like a child holding a stuffed animal. She woke up the next morning to the smell of cooking and the sound of waves hitting the shore. She walked into the kitchen with her hair in a tangled knot and a look that made me ache. We ate in silence for one long minute, a silence that was full of all the things we had not said in decades: joy, disappointment, hope, long-buried resentment. "I thought you sold the truck," she said, finally stabbing at her potatoes. "I thought you already had," I replied, and my voice was calm because I wanted it to be a place for her to land, not a courtroom. She looked at me as if she were trying to read a page of a book she had put down years before. "Ma, why didn't you tell me?" "Tell you what?" I allowed the question to hang between us like humidity. She didn't press, which was both odd and telling. She shifted in the chair and stared at the rim of her cup. I thought maybe you had nothing." You could see in her the exhaustion of people who have been on a long run and suddenly realize they've been running from something without knowing what. There was shame in her posture, the way she kept her hands folded as if they were trying hard not to reach for anything. I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to lift the envelope up like a curtain and show her the stage behind it, the deeds, the bank notices, the little legal victories Mr. Peterson had quietly secured.
But I had made a choice to let consequences do part of the work. "So, what now?" she asked, and there was a tremor in her voice that had not been there on that first call. That question is a hinge in every life. For some, it is a plea for more of the same. For others, it announces the possibility of change. I thought about Robert's last note, the line about using what we had left kind. I thought of all the ways kindness and toughness sometimes share a bed. "We're going to get through this," I told her, "but not by pretending nothing happened. You're going to have to answer for the choices you made. You're going to have to work. Not because I want to punish you, but because there is dignity in earning your way back." She laughed then, a half sob that made her shoulders shake. "You mean, like, get a job?" she asked, as if the idea was both ridiculous and medieval. "Yes," I said. "Find something steady. Help with the mortgage, help with groceries. There are lessons money can't teach if it is simply handed over." The sting on her face made me wince. I have always been able to see my own reflection in people's faces, and in that moment I saw sheltered youth and hard-won grief sitting side by side. She was not the monster I had imagined in my lonelier hours. She was a person who had been given a string of easy exits and had learned to take them. In the weeks that followed, she took a job at a small cleaning company run by a woman named Mrs. Johnson, who had worked in my neighborhood for longer than both of us had been alive. Mrs. Johnson had hands that told a story, calluses at the fingertips, a softness around the knuckles from years of folding linens. She taught Angela how to scrub without shame and how to find pride in a floor that gleamed when the work was done. Angela's cheeks were raw from work and from the kind of humility that comes when you meet your own edges. It was not an immediate redemption. She skipped shifts sometimes because old habits die hard. She complained, and I listened. Sometimes I wanted to sweep her off her feet and say, "Everything will be as it was." But again, Robert's envelope kept its small weight in my cardigan, a reminder of the alternative. I had already begun to stitch things back, a title here, an overturned sale there. But the larger tapestry of our family life, the trust between us, was frayed, and I let it knit slowly. One afternoon, I went to visit Mr. Peterson to sign another round of papers. He slid a small box across his desk with the same careful motion he used when handing friends keys to a car. Inside the box lay a tarnished ring, its band worn thin by decades of hands. "Your husband's," he said, as if I needed him to explain. He told me that in contesting the sales, they had found a safety deposit key that matched a box in the bank in town. The box had held more than watches and documents. It had held keepsakes, an old photograph of my wedding day, more than one ring that carried stories. I could have auctioned the jewels with a flourish and paid everyone's debts in one evening. I could have called Angela into the room and placed the box on the table like a judge's gavel. Instead, I closed my hand around the ring, felt the smoothness of where Robert's finger had worn it, and thought about what it means to give someone back their dignity. On my way home, I stopped at the beach and walked the shore until my shoes were damp. The tide had a way of remaking the land each day, taking some things and leaving other things larger and more settled. There, with sand between my toes and the letter folded in my breast pocket like a talisman, I felt both very small and very sure. When Angela first came home, I had been tempted to call it the end of something, a chapter closed. But it was only a beginning of the real work. Secrets, even well-intended ones, have a way of shaping people differently than truth. I had chosen a path that would require patience and discomfort for both of us. I had decided, quietly, to let consequence teach where words could not. The first part of the book closed that way, the discovery, the legal motion, the small returns that would not be boasted about. There were nights when I lay awake and thought maybe I was cruel, and other nights when I thought maybe I was wise. The line between those two is thin and often blurred. There would be more to come, more legal hearings, a moment when Angela's luck would run out entirely, a day when she would have to look at the person in the mirror and decide whether to keep blaming the world or to start building. But that came later. For now, there was a house that once again felt like mine. There was a truck with a dent in the bumper and a smell of motor oil that made me think of Summers and of Robert. There was a daughter who had finally come home, and there was a letter that told me what Robert had planned. There was also a choice, one I made with hands that trembled and a heart that wanted both to punish and to heal. If you stay with me, I will tell you what it looked like when the world shifted again, how the very man Angela trusted turned out to be a mirage, how choices made in haste came back like a tide, and how a lawyer's steady pen and a widow's quiet resolve could change the course of a family. But that is a story for the next morning, when the coffee boils, the truck waits, and the truth, finally, is set to be written in ink that cannot be unmade. If you stay with me, I will tell you what happened when the tide finally turned, how the very man Angela trusted turned out to be a mirage, and how a series of small, careful moves by a tired widow and a steady lawyer redrew the lines of our lives. The morning after I walked the shore, the mail came with its dull slap against the screen door and a thin envelope that smelled faintly of official paper. Mr. Peterson had sent a note. "We need to talk. There are developments." I folded my cardigan tighter around me and went. The office smelled of dust and old leather, and the same black coffee Mr. Peterson favored. He closed the door softly behind us and set a stack of paperwork between us like a bridge. "We were able to serve notice on the buyers," he said. "They contested. Their counsel says the signature is legitimate, but there's more." He tapped a page where handwriting samples were compared, dates underlined, an annotation about transfers. We subpoenaed the escrow records. It turns out this Edward man did not pay from any account we could trace in his name. The buyer's funds came from a shell account tied to companies he controlled. In short, whoever bought the beach house didn't do it with their own money, which means we have a valid claim of fraud. Relief washed over me so suddenly I surprised myself with a laugh that sounded like someone clearing a throat after a scream. "So we can get the house back?" I asked, voice smaller than I expected. "We can," he said, "but it will be messy. There may be creditors, liens, people claiming they acted in good faith. And Mr. Brooks' estate, because he directed we do this in a way that keeps things orderly, has to be handled with care. You understand that fighting this publicly could humiliate your daughter further if she's implicated. There's also the question of whether we should involve law enforcement. If Edward's activities are as they appear, that will lead to a criminal investigation, and I don't think you want your family pulled through that if there is a way to settle civilly and protect Angela." I listened, and in my head Robert's handwriting burned brighter than his face had. "Do it quietly," I said. "Do what you have to. Prove what you need to prove. Keep her out of anything that will trash her in public. If Mr. Peterson can untangle the legal web without a circus, do it. There are things in a life that are larger than the immediate sense of justice. For all the hurt I felt when Angela's words crashed into me, the nursing home like an order, I did not want my daughter paraded like an exhibit to satisfy my wounded pride. Quiet was part of the lesson I hoped she would learn, that there are consequences which do not have to be performed on a stage for everyone to applaud. The weeks that followed moved at a pace that is peculiar to legal work, long stretches of waiting punctuated by sharp, clarifying moments. Sometimes the waiting ate at my appetite. Sometimes it gave me room to gather facts like kindling. Mr. Peterson did what he did best. He asked for documents. He gently badgered clerks for records. He sat with bank officers and explained with exact terms what a forensic review would require. Each time he called, he would begin with some small human thing, how my neighbor Aurora had left over some lemon bars, or how the receptionist's granddaughter had started school, and then move into the business of unpicking a life.
One evening he called to say Edward had been traced to a rented office in Lisbon and had paid off an address rather than people. "He's a ghost," Mr. Peterson said. "He doesn't show up to creditors' calls. If he's in Europe, he's keeping his head down. But we have enough to challenge the transfers and to show his involvement with the shell companies that funded the sale. The bank we subpoenaed has flagged multiple suspicious transfers into his accounts from entities that don't have legitimate business operations. In inspector speak, it's a mess. In plain English, he used complex structures to give the impression of solvency where there was none." The word mess felt insufficient. Behind it were real people, families in Lisbon who might be affected by a collapsing scheme, neighbors in our town who now had to be asked to return checks or reverse payments, a daughter whose life was built on the mirage of someone else's competence. I thought about Angela's postcards, sunlight, coffee, Edward's arm. I thought about the small rigors of the cleaning shifts she'd later complain about, how quickly the glamour dissolved. "You can respond however you need to," I told Mr. Peterson when I was alone that night, "but if you can keep her name out of it and get our house back, do it." He did exactly that. He filed the necessary motions in the county where the house sat, asserting that the sale had been procured by fraud and that the chain of title was tainted by transfers funded by entities controlled by Edward and his associates. He engaged a forensic accountant to trace funds. He wrote letters to the purchasers, people who may have been innocent straw buyers, explaining the situation and offering a path to unwind the transaction without years of litigation, provided they cooperated and repaid any funds that had come from the shell accounts. Several of them chose to cooperate. They did not want to be entangled in a fraud case any more than I wanted to drag my daughter through courtrooms. Meanwhile, Angela's collapse accelerated in ways that bruised all of us. She had thought leaving for Europe was an escape. In truth, it was a spiral. Creditors called with more force than she expected. Her European accounts were frozen. Edward, who had promised to be the stabilizing hand, simply slipped away. The first time she stood in my kitchen and told me his phone had stopped ringing, her hands were wrapped around a mug as if it were a lifeline. "He took everything," she said, voice thin. "I had no idea. He lied. I swear to God, Ma, I didn't know." I believed her. Belief is not the same as excusing, but it is where you begin if you want to help someone learn. "You were fooled," I said, "but you weren't the only one. Some clever men do clever things, and they are very good at making ruin look like growth." She wanted me to call someone, her friends, her in-laws, a bank, but I kept the envelope in my cardigan like a living thing. It felt strange to have the power to rescue her instantly. It felt stranger to withhold that rescue. I told myself again then what Robert had written. Use it kind. She found work at Mrs. Johnson's cleaning service after a week of applications and many small rejections. Mrs. Johnson was a woman who kept her pride in her work and refused to let anyone call domestic labor anything less than honorable. She arrived at my house one afternoon with a casserole and a small brown envelope containing coupons and, more importantly for Angela, a job offer. "There's dignity in a mop and broom if you use it right," she told my daughter in the kitchen as I stirred gravy and kept my face polite. "You scrub out a place and you make it better for someone else. That's a thing to be proud of." Angela took to the work like a person trying on a new coat. Awkward at first, the sleeves painful, then gradually it fit. She learned to buff floors until the linoleum shone, to fold someone else's towels with an attention that felt embarrassing, and then, in its own small way, satisfying. For the first time in a long time, her hands had honest work to show for the hours. She came home with a little money in her purse and bright, tired eyes. There were nights when she wanted to sell something for fast cash. The safety deposit key Mr. Peterson had found in Robert's papers sat in the top dresser drawer like a promise. One afternoon, she slipped the small brass key out and held it as if it might make good on every fear she had. "Just one ring," she whispered, looking at the tarnished wedding band Mr. Peterson had returned to me months earlier. "Just one would fix this." I saw the flash in her face. Temptation, desperation, the quiet logic that said quick means easier. "You can have what you need," I said. My voice was steady, and I kept my hands on the counter as if the kitchen itself were a stage I did not want to move from. But if you sell what's left of what was given to us by love, you're trading memory for a moment's relief. There are other ways. She looked at me as if I had always been a stranger who suddenly spoke a language she had forgotten. What other ways? She asked, sharp. We will find the funds to untie your immediate debt, I replied, but only in ways that repair the harm, and you will continue to work. You will pay back what you can. You will learn how to keep money without letting it keep you. That is the offer. That offer required action behind the scenes. Mr. Peterson, with his calm insistence on paper and procedure, negotiated with several creditors and secured agreements where Angela's liability would be considered in light of evidence that Edward had been acting deceptively. He did so using funds that were legally part of Robert's estate. We settled where settlement made more sense than litigation. We paid certain outstanding balances directly rather than letting those debts fester into court judgments, but we did not give Angela a blank check. She signed agreements. Part of her earnings would go toward these settlements. Her wages would be attached to modest repayment terms that she could manage if she kept working. The idea was not to smother her with debt, but to teach a rhythm of responsibility. Earn, pay, build. One rainy afternoon, Mr. Peterson called me in and said, "We have something else." He set a small box on the table between us, unadorned, ordinary. Inside sat a handful of pieces, a silver locket with a tiny photograph, a brooch I had thought lost when I was 20, a string of small, not flashy, pearls. "These came from the safe deposit box," he said. "They are sentimental more than they are worth, but they could help in the short term if you wanted. Liquidate an item or two and get some breathing room." Angela came by the office with me that day, shoulders pulled inward as if she could make herself small enough to be forgiven by proximity alone. She saw the pearls and the old photograph of Robert and me on our wedding day, his hair darker, our faces hopeful. Her fingers hovered over the pearls, as if they were a lit match she might snuff or strike. "I could sell these," she said. "You could," said Mr. Peterson, and his voice had the professional distance of someone who sees every human difficulty as something to be resolved with a ledger and empathy. "But consider what you'd be selling. These are not only objects. They are the trace of someone's life. If you sell them to clear the remainder of a bill, I will not stop you. But if you sell them to avoid doing the work of paying back your debts, we will talk about that." Angela put the pearls back into the box with a care that suggested she understood, finally, the difference. There was humility in that small gesture, the kind that is the beginning of rebuilding. I felt a faint, complicated pride that did not erase the nights I had lain awake thinking of the nursing home remark. Pride and grief can coexist in odd proximity. There was, inevitably, a confrontation that had nothing to do with documents and everything to do with what I had withheld. One gray afternoon, long after the ink on a few settlements had dried, Angela stormed into my kitchen and slammed her hand on the table. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded. Her voice was not an attack so much as a wounded animal's cry, scared and angry and raw. "Why did you let me come home to the couch and make me work at a cleaning job instead of, telling me that you had enough to bail me out?" I had been stirring soup, a small thing that kept my hands busy and made me feel useful. I looked up and saw a version of myself at 27 staring back, frayed, tired, hopeful. "Because I wanted you to see what it feels like," I said. "Not so you would hurt, but so you would learn to stand. People who are always rescued learn to expect rescue."
People who learn to rescue themselves by working, by thinking, by choosing differently, carry a steadiness that lasts. "You made me suffer," she said. "You let me suffer." "Yes," I said, "and if that makes you hate me for a while, I accept that. But I will tell you this, I did not set out to break you. I set out to change a habit. You don't understand now. Maybe you will much later. But there is dignity in earning your keep. There is pride in earning your place in a family, not taking it." Her face collapsed into something like a child's, all acrid lines smudged into a sort of recognition. There was a long held breath, mine, and then a sob that was not theatrical but honest. She sat down slowly, shoulders slumped, and I handed her a dish towel to grip as if it were a rope. Time does interesting work on people. It polishes, it scours, it hollows out spaces where new growth can take root. Angela's work at the cleaning company began to anchor her. She learned to count, to balance schedules, to manage a small purse. She made friends with a woman who cleaned the front desks at the community college and who mentioned once, casually, that the college offered night classes and social work. "You'd be good at it," the woman said. "You care, and you know how to listen." The suggestion landed like a seed. Mrs. Johnson watched this quietly. Sometimes she would say to me, "She's got grit, that one. You give her something hard, she'll figure out how to hold it." I thought about how many times I had believed in Angela in ways she had not seen. I thought of Robert's quiet plan sewn into papers folded and secreted away. There was a final legal knot to untie. One of the purchasers of the beach house, an innocent family who had contracted in good faith, grew impatient. They wanted a clear title or their money back. We negotiated with them, offering to return their purchase funds and restore their losses from assets tied to Robert's estate. Mr. Peterson orchestrated the transfer with a care that felt like scripture in his hands: parchment, signatures, stamps. The title was replaced into our name by the court, and the house came back to us without a circus. The truck was likewise returned after an explanation and an apology. All of this unfolded quietly, the way a small riot is sometimes disassembled by disguising the work as ordinary. Then there was the moment of revelation, the one I had delayed for reasons both noble and selfish. Mr. Peterson insisted that, for closure and for Angela's own dignity, the full truth should be told in his office. He suggested a neutral place where papers could be handled like evidence and history could be set down like a ledger. I agreed because I trusted him, and because I knew the reveal needed the precision of a professional to make it a healing rather than an accusation. We sat in his office one morning with a stack of deeds, bank statements, and the old letter folded into a clean envelope.
Angela was there, hands clasped, wearing the plain blue blouse she wore to work, eyes thinner than they had been at 25, but steadier. Mr. Peterson placed the documents on his desk carefully and looked at her as if she were a client and a child all at once. "I want to tell you what happened," I said, and there was no theatricality in my voice, only the flatness of someone who had made a decision and now had to live with its consequences. Robert left these to me. He arranged them so they would not be used for spectacle. He asked that I managed them with kindness. She looked at the pages as if they were a foreign language. "You mean you had the money?" Her voice had the wear of disbelief. "Yes," I said. "We had more than you were told. Robert saved quietly. He trusted me to decide how to use it." She stared at me. "Then why did you let me come home and work? Why did you pay settlements but not tell me? You could have," her voice broke, "you could have saved me from the humiliation." "I could have," I said, "and I could have undone something deeper in you. I would have removed the chance for you to learn how to stand. People who never experience consequence can never practice the muscles of repair. That was my choice." She flinched, not because she thought me cruel, but because she was seeing me as a person capable of calculation as well as care. "You planned this?" she asked, voice brittle. "I planned it," I admitted, "not to punish you, to teach you, to give you the space to build a life that isn't dependent on taking. I wanted you to learn the dignity of earning, not the ease of being given." Anger swelled briefly in her face, then broke into an exhausted sadness. "So, all this time you were, what, staging my failure so you could make a point?" "No," I replied. "I was choosing a path that I believed would make you stronger. I accept that it hurt you. I accept that you may hate me for it for a while. But I did it because I love you, and because I wanted you to become a woman who could stand when things were hard." Mr. Peterson put a hand atop the stack of documents and, with the solemnity of someone who signs things that change lives, pushed them toward her. "These are the deeds," he said. "The titles are clear now. The settlements are arranged. The accounts Mr. Brooks left are being overseen by a trust we have set up with stipulations that he believed would steward the assets kindly." She ran her fingers over the paper. Tears came then, quietly and without shame. "You could have told me," she whispered. "You could have asked," I said. "You had the right to ask. Instead, you chose to make choices that pushed people aside. I know you at your best and at your worst. I wanted to give you a way back that required you to walk it." And then the hardest part, the bargain. "There are conditions," I said. "Not legal ones so much as moral ones. I paid certain debts because it was necessary."
I am not handing you a life to step back into old patterns. If you accept help, you must accept the work. You will continue to work. You will contribute to the home. You will enroll in classes at night if you can. You will not use the house as a safety net to return to old habits. She looked at me, raw vulnerability wearing her like a thin dress. "You mean you want me to keep working even after all this?" "Yes," I said,
And when you can, I want you to study. Not because I want to control you, but because I think you will find meaning in it. Helping others is good for people who have been helped and who know what it feels like to need. There, in that office that smelled faintly of old books and legal ink, something between us changed. Not healed entirely. Trust is not a thing restored by a single act, but begun. She agreed, and she cried, and she promised. And the tears were not only for what she had suffered, but for what she had nearly lost. Months folded into one another after that. Angela enrolled in night classes at the community college, sociology first, then an introductory class in social work. She applied for a scholarship, and with the help of Mrs. Johnson's recommendation and some funds I arranged through the trust, she qualified for aid that made the nights manageable. She kept her cleaning job and began to take on part-time work assisting at a small shelter run by a woman named Rosa, who specialized in helping women leave abusive situations. Angela found a rhythm: work, class, study, sleep. There were slips, nights she missed a class, weekends she slept too long, but the pattern held. We began, too, to think more deliberately about how the assets Robert had left could be used beyond our own household. He had always joked that if he had found a way to put his money where it could do good, he would sleep better. I realized, as the coastal wind scraped the porch boards and paint peeled in honest honesty, that we had the chance to transform a family sorrow into community good. I talked with Mr. Peterson and with Aurora and with a small circle of friends. We talked about a fund, a purpose. I want to open the beach house as a place for women who are starting over, I told Angela one evening as we watched the sun lower like a coin into the horizon. A temporary shelter, a place where they can rest, get resources, take a class, a place that says you are not broken beyond repair. She leaned on the railing and looked at the sea and the tiny town spread out like a paper map. Would you do that? She asked. We will, I said. We'll create a foundation. We'll use part of the estate to endow it so it can exist beyond our lifetimes. It will be run by professionals. We'll appoint a board. You can be part of it when you are ready. The idea of the beach house as a shelter felt right in a way that warmed me, a place where the ocean's wide, indifferent horizon could remind people there is more beyond what hurts them right now.
We painted the house a pale, cheerful color. We fixed the handrail Robert had insisted on keeping because he said it had character. We added rooms that could host a woman for a month or two while she regained her footing. Rosa helped design programs for counseling and job training. Mrs. Johnson coordinated linens and donations. Aurora knitted blankets. Opening day was small and local, but full of the kind of warmth that makes you feel a life was made better because you lived it. Neighbors brought food. There were a few speeches, that is, a few gentle sentences of thanks given and accepted. Angela stood at my side, nervous but proud, and when it came time for the ribbon to be cut, her hand found mine. She squeezed, and I squeezed back. It did not mean everything was perfect. Trust takes more than brick and paint. There were days I still caught myself bristling at a careless word, nights when the old pain of loss snuck up like fog. But there was also a steadying power to doing the work in public. The shelter helped women who had nowhere to go. It offered job referrals, temporary housing, and a small scholarship for vocational training that Angela helped administer as she completed her schooling. Her life shifted in ways that were gradual and satisfying. She completed her associate's degree and later enrolled in a bachelor's program in social work. She did internships at the shelter and then, eventually, at a nonprofit that specialized in women's economic empowerment. She learned to translate the humility of household work into an ethics of service, to meet people where they were, to listen without judgment, to hold the line between enabling and empowering. One afternoon, months after the opening, a woman came to the shelter with a small child and no shoes. Angela helped her fill out forms, took her to a local thrift store, and, driving back, told me in a voice that had been reshaped by experience, "Ma, I get to do this. I get to watch someone's face change when they realize someone else believes in them." I had never been prouder in a way that did not flatten pain. I had never been prouder that her life, once so easily set adrift, had become anchored to a purpose. We made a formal decision about the assets, too. The trust was rewritten, properly, legally, so that the principal would support the shelter, and a small bursary fund for women seeking vocational training. Mr. Peterson oversaw the construction of a simple, ironclad governance structure that made sure the funds could neither be squandered nor used for vanity. The money was a tool now, not a magic wand. This felt like Robert's kind of kindness, private, thoughtful, and directed. In time, the town came to know the beach house for both the sand and the second chances it offered. People who had once come for summer, rented weeks now, came to volunteer for a day. The shelter hosted workshops on budgeting, on safe housing, on the dignity of work.
Angela, who once thought a mop was something to hide from, now taught a class on organizing a household budget and saving for an emergency. The irony tasted sweet in my mouth. There was an even quieter reconciliation that unfolded between us. Not a fairy tale absolution, but a slow mending. We spoke of Robert sometimes, which until then had felt hazardous, as though speaking his name might crack open old wounds. We laughed once, softly, about a pair of glasses he kept losing, and the way he always wore the same watch to weddings and funerals alike, as if time was something to be honored both in joy and sorrow. One evening, as we sat on the porch, the sky the color of a bruise turned sweet, Angela reached for my hand and said, "I'm sorry I ever said that thing, the nursing home thing. I didn't mean it the way it landed. I was scared, Ma. I was afraid of being small." I felt a strange looseness in my chest, as if something had been held too tight for too long and had finally been set down. "I know," I said. "Words can land like a stone and bruise. But you," I paused because there was a decades-long accumulation of things to say, and none of them fit neatly into a single breath. "You've done the hard work since then. That matters more than a careless phrase." We didn't pretend the past hadn't happened. We didn't make the mistake of baptizing angers into absolution. But there was a new steadiness in the way we held our home, like a boat finally anchored. She became, to my surprise and delight, a woman of purpose who kept her hands honest and her heart open in a way that would make Robert smile. I kept a private ledger too, a quiet tally of the nights I had worried that what I did might be wrong, and the mornings when I saw evidence that choice had been met with growth. I wondered often about the ethics of parental intervention, how much to steer, and when to let the current take someone. There is no clean answer, only the messy business of living and learning. My choices had been a blend of grief and courage, and a stubborn belief that someone who had been cared for deserved to be shown the way back without being humiliated into it. Sometimes neighbors asked if the beach house had made me soft. "You could have been ruthless," said one elderly man at the barber shop, leaning toward me as if he feared I might slip away. "You had every right to be harsh." I would tell him that I had nearly been harsh a dozen times. I told him that what I wanted was not to win a fight, but to rebuild a life. He nodded in a way that suggested he understood more than I gave him credit for. When I think about Robert's letter now, the line about being rich not in the loud way the world keeps score, but in a way it will matter when the noise of life quiets down, I see what he meant. It wasn't about the size of the bank account. It was about the way one uses what one has to create meaning beyond oneself. We used what we had to create room for dignity, for second chances, for safe shelter and job training. The beach house became a place where women learned to stand, and where, sometimes, daughters and mothers relearned how to be kin. There were moments of quiet triumph, like the day Angela received a certificate for finishing a course in trauma-informed care. She came to the kitchen that night with the certificate tucked in her bag and announced, with a kind of shy pride, that she'd been chosen to lead a workshop at the shelter. She set the certificate on the table, and we made a small dinner to celebrate. The truck still had the dent in the bumper, and the porch light still flickered in a way that made me think of wiring that belonged to an era more forgiving of imperfections. We lit candles anyway, and ate the roast I had learned to make the way Robert had liked it, slow and patient. I told her once, at the end of an evening when the house had the comfortable hush of people who knew when to speak and when to be quiet, that Robert had left me something else besides money. He had left a model of how to plan for the future without making it a show. He had trusted me, and he had trusted that kindness should be clever as well as compassionate. "You kept his secret," Angela said, voice small. "You didn't tell me right away." "I kept it because I thought it would give you the space to see yourself without my rescue," I said, "and because I wanted to use what he left in a way that helped more than it hurt." I paused, looking at her, at the woman she had become. "I am proud of you." She looked back at me with the complex look of someone who had shed pieces of armor and found underneath a person they liked better. "I didn't know I could do it," she admitted. I didn't know I had it in me. You did, I said simply. We worked to create safeguards so that the wealth would do good and not corrupt. The foundation had an advisory board made up of local people and professionals. I insisted on accountability because I had seen what could happen when money is left to rot or to be used as a shield. Robert would have liked that. He would have liked the idea of a small, sensible structure that ensured kindness could be practical and lasting. Years later, people would sometimes recount the story in shorter forms. The woman whose daughter told her to move to a nursing home turned around and opened a shelter, someone would say, compressing years into a single sentence. That is the way we like stories, neat. But the real truth was richer in complication. It was nights of paperwork, of breakfasts eaten in silence, of a daughter scrubbing floors and learning how not to sleep through her responsibilities, of neighbors who brought casseroles, and of a lawyer who kept faith, and a small town that, in the end, believed in second chances. There were quieter rewards, too.
Aurora would bring over bowls of soup in winter and tell me stories of her own mother and the ways she had learned to survive. Mrs. Johnson would visit the shelter and take pride in every woman who came through, who found a job and kept it. Rosa, who once had a shelter built from sheer will and thrift, would sit at our kitchen table and talk about the small miracles. A woman who called to say she had signed a lease. A girl who graduated from a vocational program and sent a postcard with a smiling face. And Angela, she became the person who others came to when they needed someone who had been through the small humiliations of rebuilding and come out the other side with humility and purpose. She taught classes on budgeting and dignity in work. She sat with women who had been harmed and helped them find their feet again. She married again once she had the capacity to choose with clear eyes. This time she chose someone steady, someone who did not offer a quick life, but who offered partnership. She kept that steady rhythm of paying back what she could, giving what she could, and overseeing the work of the shelter with a careful, loving hand. One evening, late and tired, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and looked at the stars. The house hummed behind me. The waves whispered their slow constancy. Angela came out with 2 blankets and sat down beside me. "I remember that phone call," she said, not as an accusation now, but as a recollection, a landmark. I remember saying that thing about a nursing home like it was a fact I could control. "You said a hurt word," I said. "Words can hurt." "I mean it differently now," she whispered. "I meant to protect myself. I thought being small was shameful. But you showed me, sometimes in ways that hurt, that small can be strong." She turned to look at me. "Thank you for not letting me stay small." I felt the depth of her gratitude in a way that felt like a gift. "Thank you for being brave enough to change," I said. We sat there for a long time, not speaking much, watching the night unroll. I thought of Robert, of how careful he had been, how private his generosity. I thought of the letter he had left, the line about being rich in the right way. The legacy he left us was not merely financial. It was moral in the most human sense, the courage to decide how to use what we have and the patience to let something grow the hard way. If someone asked me now whether I would do it again, the decision to withhold full rescue so Angela would be forced to work, to stumble, and to rebuild, I would say this: there is no single answer for every family, every child. People are different. Circumstances vary. But for us, in that strange, tender balance of grief and love, it was the course that began to remake us. It taught my daughter that she was capable of more than she had thought. It taught me that love sometimes means letting someone stand back up on their own 2 feet. It taught both of us that money, used well, could expand not just our lives, but the lives of many others. The house still had paint flaking near the handrail, the truck still smelled of motor oil and old summer days, the town still had the same narrow streets lined with clapboard houses. But the place felt different in the best of ways. People who had once casually judged now came to volunteer. Women who had nowhere to go found a bed and a warm dinner. And when Angela brought a new graduate of the job program by to show me how she had gotten a new position at a local nonprofit, I felt something in me uncoil and settle. There is no neat single moral to hand you like a ribbon. Life is always a series of compromises and choices stitched together over time. But if you ever find yourself standing at the same kind of crossroad, angry, hurt, holding the key to someone else's fate,
Remember that the hardest decisions are those that weigh both heart and consequence. Decide with both. If you've listened this far, thank you for staying with the story. If it moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear that people can change and that dignity is often found in small, ordinary work. And if you want to follow more stories like this one, consider subscribing. It helps us keep telling the ones that matter.